Hello, my name is Robert O'Sullivan, and today I am going to partially try to tell you a rather unusual story of what has gone on in a place called Brookings, Oregon. Brookings, Oregon is a coastal city, attractive to many tourists who like the coastal views and the beautiful setting, but it's also an expensive city, and it becomes a difficult place for people of limited resources to live because things like rentals are just plain high, and there are a lot of properties that are sitting empty much of the year that are being used for property rentals. But a big question has arisen in recent years in Brookings because of how the city government responds to the presence of some unhoused people, some struggling people in the community, and has evoked a large and big fight between the city and an Episcopal church in town, St. Timothy's. I've become kind of a chronicler of this struggle. A website called progressivechristianity.org has many things that I fed to that site, all under the title of Valiant, Vicar versus Scofflaw City. Now, we don't usually think of the word valiant as something that you would necessarily quickly assign to a clergy person, unless you're designing some sort of British detective show and somehow a valiant vicar plays in that role. To my knowledge, that hasn't happened. But Brookings has had a valiant vicar who actually grew up in Brookings, graduated from his high school, is a commercial, has been a long time fisher person, crabber in Brookings Harbor, and has one who's been willing to not let the city bully it around. And part of the bullying that the city was doing had to do with, again, unhoused people or people who are struggling just to get by in a little coastal city that doesn't have much housing and that is expensive to live in.
Father Bernie, we don't often think of churches as being notorious, but St. Tim's has quite a reputation in the town and throughout the state and beyond that as well. And could you tell a little about how it found itself becoming notorious?
Well, you know, we've always had robust ministries over the course of the last 25 years, even before I became the priest. My predecessor, the priest that mentored me, that was here before I was very much active in outreach and robust ministries. And I kind of fell, I got to fill his shoes and take the baton,
And he inspired you to the ministry.
Very much so, yeah. He was the one that suggested that I seek ordination.
Mm-hmm.
And so with his support, I was able to do that. It only took like 6 years, but so in 2008, I was ordained to the priesthood across the street in Azalea Park, which is just behind this back wall here where we're sitting. And so I've been the senior pastor, I guess you would say. We call it the vicar of this congregation since the summer of 2008, since July, in fact, of 2008. And as we record this, it's July.
Okay.
So I always felt like we needed to be about our Father's business. And when I say our Father, I mean God in heaven. We need to be about bringing the kingdom of God closer to being discernible in this world. Mm. And so when we had opportunities to do different things, like our free health clinic that we started in 2010, that went until 2014, that was a good opportunity for us to, bring healing to people. And when we started our soup kitchen in 2009, it gave us an opportunity to make sure that people are fed. And then when we started our advocacy team, whatever year that was, and I don't even know, because it sort of started gradually. But when we were able to do that, then we were able to be more involved in bringing people into stability in their lives. And so that's been our primary motivating goal, is to have people be able to live more fully into who they're called to be.
This started over the years back in, 10, 15 years ago. Churches in Brookings started a feeding program for people who needed a free lunch or a free meal, whatever time of day it was. And these included a Catholic church, a Lutheran church, a Methodist church, actually from Smith River, but working with St. Tim's Episcopal Church, and Church of the Nazarene. And anyway, it was a program that didn't create much controversy for a long period of time. And most churches fed like a couple times a week, and it seemed a nice gesture being done in the community. It was posted on official city notice boards as to where they were available, and still is as far as I know. But then COVID came about, and what happened is many of the churches that were offering free feedings stopped. Now, you can hardly blame them because almost everything stopped in this city. The county health department was actually shut down because it didn't have the proper leadership available to it. And many businesses, places to eat and drink and whatever, just plain closed up during especially the early year or two of COVID. And while most of the churches, except for the Presbyterians and the Episcopalians, shut off their free meal service, those two continued, and St. Tim's especially stepped up on it. They had a long tradition of doing so. The farmers' food bank, or the food bank in Brookings, was originated at St. Tim's, and it's long been known to be the place to go if you had troubles and needs that had to be met.
You also seem to sometimes appear at community forums. I think I first met you at an Indivisible group here in Brookings, and you see that as part of your calling?
Yes, certainly attracted to any groups that are working on social justice issues. And, you know, as clergy, both Father Bernie and I, over the years, have been at city council meetings to see what's going on. If we know there's an issue on the agenda that impacts our people in need in particular. So the community meals, yes, are open to anybody. And now with food prices going up and people on fixed incomes that are not going up, there is certainly a need for, you know, someone to come in and help with additional food source.
My wife and I moved from California to Brookings about 10 years ago. My wife has since died 5 years ago, but we were delighted that we were able to get a really pleasant property, but we had trouble finding a church home. We kind of went church shopping, and I recently saw a study which says that most retired pastors, Christian pastors, a good third or so after they retire have trouble finding a good church home. Now, this can be problematic because many pastors have tenure, like a professor, and they're not always the best of preachers. And sometimes if you go to churches to be illumined and helped by the messages there, you might not get a whole lot that is worthy to you. My wife and I went to St. Tim's a few times, and we knew of its history of helping people who were hurting. We knew of its feeding programs, and we brought stuff to share with people there. But we had a little trouble with the worship and the sermons, and we didn't really become part of that community or or any community of a religious nature around here. We shopped around and sometimes just had our own little services at home or listened to great classical music and so forth. Anyway, things started to change during COVID. The city came up with the idea that since there are increasing number of people who were losing their places to live and so forth, that and we're living in cars, that maybe it would be a good idea if the cars could park in church parking lots. They asked all the churches within Brookings, and there are about 15, I understand, within the city limits to do this, and only St. Tim's was willing to, and it turned out that was unfortunate thing to happen because the people who were allowed to live there had mental kind of issues and didn't have the type of support that they maybe should have gotten to allow them to be there. And I understand that both of these individuals who sometimes got in fights with each other and were sources of upset to neighbors around there are now both in state mental institutions, and they probably should have been in them earlier, but there were very few ways, very few types of mental health services around here. Now, when the congregation at St. Tim's stepped up in their feedings, when the other churches stepped down, it became a little more controversial, but we have to say something about where the church is located. It's right across the street, surrounded largely by a large public park, Azalea Park, a place that Brookings is known for. And sometimes people put up a tent in the park, and maybe they wander around the neighborhood looking in trash cans for old soda containers that they can get some money for. But a lot of the neighbors of St. Tim's and the neighbors of that park started saying that because St. Tim's was providing so many services to the unhoused and struggling, that they were bringing what they called undesirables into the neighborhood, vagrants, and they started complaining to the city. They passed around a petition that was signed by about 29 or 30 people, and the city's response initially was to try to get the churches all together and talk things through. That didn't work very well. It was a time when people were doing things by Zoom, and so they came up with a ordinance that required churches to get permission from the city to do feedings and to limit their number of feedings per week and the number of hours that could take place. And this was clearly aimed to encourage people not to go to these free meals because they were considered undesirable. St. Tim's realized that there were serious religious issues here. Feeding is a part of Christian faith that goes back to the ministry of Jesus himself, and they were not to be punished because they were responding to people who were hurting. They should be applauded for doing so, and that's something which a federal judge ultimately wound up saying.
So it was frustrating. It was frustrating for the people who live here, along our street, the people who drive by, the people who use Azalea Park, who would see this. And it was frustrating for us because we would have hoped that it would have been much more responsive, that things would have happened much more quickly. But eventually, because for whatever reason we are patient people, those three specific women did get care and are living a life that is much, much better now than it would have been before. Otherwise, without our intervention, without our ministries, they wouldn't be where they are now, I promise you.
You mentioned some geographic factors. Azalea Park is a large, famous city park, right? Almost surrounds this church, or 2/3 of it maybe.
Yeah.
And especially when housing is so difficult, some people stay in parks and bring their tents and their vehicles or whatever. And maybe some of the neighborhood stuff that people were complaining about had nothing to do
It was
with
spillover from the park,
spillover from the park.
which
and,
added to things, right?
yeah, and made it probably quite a bit worse.
So the public angst, was not alleviated, was enhanced because of people sleeping in the park. At one time, there was as many as 20 different people sleeping in that park each night.
This whole issue wound up in federal court, and probably over $1 million in taxpayer money has been wasted in the process. Over 625 went to in the settlement that followed a judicial decision. 625 went to the law firms involved in the suit itself. And if you count the amount of money spent to have the U.S. Department of Justice intervene, the court cost in Medford involving the judge and his clerks and all that, probably next to $1 million were wasted in the process because of some very basic things.
I don't think they intended for us not to feed people when they signed that petition. I think they just wanted to see our car camping ministry stopped. And the car camping ministry was because during COVID, there was the city council was trying to make it so that people had a place to be during the lockdown. They thought that and I agree with them, that their thought was, rather than have people roaming around and having no place to be and potentially testing positive for COVID and maybe spreading it around, let's give them set places to be. And so the hope was that the 15 churches within the city limits, that each of them would house 3 cars per church, and then that would be 45 people that they could have, in a place where they would be able to be safe and could potentially quarantine safely too, should they get COVID. And we didn't know how it was all going to turn out at the time. We didn't know just how much our community was going to be impacted.
I said earlier I called this the Valiant Vicar versus the Scofflaw city. And I want to talk a little about the word scofflaw. I'm a person who's always been very interested in words. And I assume that that's an English word that's been around for a long time. It involves 2 easy to understand words, scoffing and law. But I was surprised to learn that it didn't really come into common usage until the early 20th century, when prohibition was part of the law in this land, and those who had bathtub gin being made or speakeasies or unusual ways to get alcohol were said to be people who scoffed at the law. They looked at the law and thought that does not apply to me.
We figured at the time, and it was a decision that we made, that it was in everybody's best interest when it comes to our parish. Well, when I say everybody, I mean not necessarily the folks who had to witness that, because you feel so powerless to watch someone's life unravel. Mm-hmm. And I really feel a lot of compassion for folks that have to watch that without being able to do anything and without any information, because they were outside of the information loop. So they didn't have accurate information about what was going on. They thought that we were enabling, when in reality what we're trying to do was get that person to rehab, and we can't get them to rehab if we can't find them. I mean, there was a plan, but they weren't privy to the plan.
Mm-hmm. Well, there happens to be a lot of law regarding religion in this land for a very important reason, and that is much of our liberty is bound up in what people should recognize as serious constitutional documents that say that the government should stay out of certain things. It's not their business to limit people's speech. It's not their business to limit press. It's not their business to try to legislate the right of people peaceably to assemble for the redress of grievances. It's not the government's business to make a establishment of religion or to interfere with the exercise thereof. Because of all that, anytime a city government starts thinking about telling churches what they should and should not do, they should realize that there's this strong prohibition not only in the U.S. Constitution, but even clearer and stronger provision in the Oregon Constitution, which says that basically religious rights should not be interfered with for any reason whatsoever. Also, there's federal law that was passed unanimously in the year 2000 by both houses of Congress, and that had a very, very strong point to make. It said that government should not mess around with the right of religion to be practiced freely unless there's a compelling state interest that must be met and cannot be met by less restrictive means than a government would be proposing. This is something that the city government clearly did not have. When this bill was before Congress, it was there because Congress was tired of some court decisions and some other things that brought a lot of complaints to local officials about what was happening in churches. And the Congress said, no, you can't do this sort of thing. You have to have a compelling state interest to do so, and that it has to be the least restrictive way of doing that. This bill was, in both houses of Congress, passed unanimously. In the Senate, perhaps its most conservative member, Orrin Hatch of Utah, and perhaps its most liberal member, Teddy Kennedy of Massachusetts, were the main co-sponsors of the legislation. It passed by a voice vote. No one rejected it.
As my understanding of your understanding of being a deacon, it doesn't always just involve the nitty-gritty stuff about personal needs and finances and that, but goes far beyond that in terms of your interaction with people and with the community.
Yeah. Yes, well, it takes all kinds of different forms. So at St. Timothy's, we have a lot of people working on issues and caring for people's needs. We call it the advocacy team. And we're also partnering with a lot of nonprofits in the region that do the similar things. But what I try to do, because I have that capacity and not being in an employed situation, I can do sometimes the more intimate, more personal, ongoing companioning of someone, maybe is for several years regarding what's going on in their life. So I have a number of individuals I'm working with that I do that with, someone who's gone through lengthy, years-long cancer treatment, who would need companioning to help to get to appointments or all kinds of things. And there's another situation with a mother and son that have ongoing things. So I have that ability to just companion, as we call it. And then as a deacon, I'm also really involved at St. Timothy's with Christian education. So we have lots of new people at St. Timothy's. The church has attracted new people because they see that we are really trying to follow Jesus.
However, the people of Brookings City Council, and we had a string of unusual characters, had the impression that these laws I just mentioned didn't apply to Brookings. They could be scoffed at. This, after all, was known as the banana belt of the Oregon coast, and that maybe got some people to have the idea that this was a banana republic, and things that applied to every other city and county and municipal agency in the country didn't apply to it. This resulted in a lawsuit by the church, and they should be grateful that they had the support of the Diocese of Western Oregon, and also were able to, with the help of the diocese, contract with a large national firm that is known for its pro bono work. pro bono publica means for the good of the republic, and large firms that are committed to pro bono work take the attitude that they'll do things that are good for the general public, and if they prevail, then their fees are paid by the losing party, and otherwise they might have to swallow some fees themselves. But anyway, it was long litigation. But the unfortunate thing about it all is, although a judge ruled very clearly that this was unconstitutional, this does not take any legal precedence role. Now, I say this because of the way courts work. On both the state and the federal level, generally only things are considered precedents if they were set by, like, the U.S. Supreme Court or a circuit court of appeal, or in state courts their equivalent. And this was just by a magistrate judge in a local district court in Oregon. It was clear that the city could only lose more money if they appealed. They chose to settle. They agreed with the city to drop an even more egregious type of legislation, which the city really tried to place on the church, and frankly is what got me involved in becoming an advocate for the church and trying to let as many people know as I could through means that I could figure out might be available to me, to just say, we can't let these scofflaws get away with something that threatens to any church anywhere if it were the law of the land.
For the churches that are really concerned about somebody's, afterlife, whether or not they're going to go to heaven or not, well, let's make sure they're fed and housed first, and then let's help them think about where they're going to spend the afterlife. And to me, that's the progression. That's the order that we should seek things. I think in their minds, it's like, it doesn't matter if you're going to end up spending all of eternity in this place called hell, then it doesn't really matter, I guess, whether you're housed or not, I suppose, is maybe that's their way of thinking. But to me,
there's no heating bill in hell. Well,
to me, though, they're experiencing hell on earth because of the instability that they're living through. Because, every day they're wondering where they're going to, use the restroom each morning. They're wondering where they're going to sleep each night. They're wondering where their next meal is going to come from, perhaps. That, to me, that's hellish. Mm-hmm. So I want to see if we can't mitigate that now. And then, as far as the rest of their relationship with God, be that Jesus, I don't necessarily require people to understand God the same way I do. I understand God through the person of Jesus Christ. If somebody else understands God a different way, I don't see where I need to, get in the way of that.
Getting back to the city, basically $1 million was wasted on that litigation. And it might not have happened if your church were not affiliated with the Episcopal Church and the resources it had, and a large firm that sees pro bono work as a part of their calling, if you want to do it.
Yeah.
But was the city just plain getting bad advice, or not?
Well, that's the thing that gets me, is that were they getting legal counsel that was telling them, hey, you guys got deep pockets, keep going? Is that what was going on? Or was there just this real idea? Was there an idea, perhaps, and I don't know the answer to this, but, the homeless crisis came home to Brookings, and, none of us want to see that in our community. And if we can lessen the amount of services they get, maybe they'll keep going on to the next community, or maybe somehow or another we can make them not quite so visible if we don't provide services as a community for people who are unhoused. I kind of think maybe I think the idea is might have been, let's just, we don't, like a reluctance to cave into admitting there's a problem. And if there's, and it's not that they didn't want to see a feeding ministry 7 days a week. They just wanted it to be spread out over more churches. Well, that's
not easily done.
no.
Well, much more egregious than their attack on the feeding stuff was their effort to say that a church should only be a place for worship. And
yeah, there was some things that I'm sure they regret that they said about, how to define a church. Because you and I know that a church isn't a building. A church is a collection of people who participate in ministries that are informed by their faith. In our case, what informs us are, the things that have to do with the Sermon on the Mount, and, when Jesus is talking about whatever you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. I mean, those are the things that inform our ministries. Other churches, their ministries are informed by whatever else, whatever they focus on. And, but nonetheless, you can't have a church by definition has ministry. I don't see how it cannot. I mean, it's not just you worship on a certain day at a certain hour for an hour and 15 minutes and go home and the building sits empty the rest of the time. I mean, I've always felt that our building is one of our strongest assets that we need to leverage for the use of, God's glory. And
that includes things like people getting showers when they need them.
absolutely. We could be a congregation, we could be a church and meet in, say, some other space, some rented space, even in a high school cafeteria, for instance. There's churches that meet. When I was, at one time, I was part of a congregation that met in a middle school auditorium during my seminary days when I did a thing called field education, when I was assigned as a seminarian to a parish in Virginia. And, but they do not have office hours in that space because it's a school auditorium. So they can't have interactions with the public in that space. So they would have to have some office off-site, which they didn't have. They wouldn't be able to do certain ministries because of limitations, because of space. Since we have this space, let's use it so that this building is being used 7 days a week. Makes sense to me. We should leverage it to the greatest extent we can. And I'm proud to say that this building is used 7 days a week. And ironically enough, the space that we're sitting in right now is the space that's used the least. Because the office is used Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The showers, the restrooms are used Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and more. The meeting room in the back is used just about every day of the week. In fact, it is used every day of the week. The kitchen is used oftentimes 4 days a week. The parish hall is used 4 days a week. The old parish hall is used something like 3 days a week. This space here is only used 2 days a week.
Tell us a little about the advocacy team. Some of it seems unusual for a church to be involved in.
Well, if you think about systems are complicated. To be able to obtain a primary care provider is complicated, especially for someone who is perhaps struggling just to pay their electric bill. How are they going to find a primary care provider and fill out the applications and the paperwork? We come alongside people and we help them do that. That's an example. What about somebody who has perhaps had, they fell, they broke their leg, they can't work, and now they can't pay their rent as they convalesce? How, there might be workers' comp, there might not be, they might have exhausted their workers' comp. How can they, or maybe they're on a fixed income for various different reasons, or maybe they have a disability that prevents them from working. Mm-hmm. So how do they stay housed when they are no longer able to go to the grocery store or no longer able to work or whatever the circumstances might be. That's what we help people do. We come alongside them and we help navigate through the complicated system so that they can access the benefits, the services they're entitled to that they might not even know exist. Just today we were talking about how difficult it is for someone to get car seats. Your child goes from being an infant to being a toddler, and now you need a bigger car seat. Well, you can't buy used car seats. There's like a law that says you can't buy a used car seat. You can't
Learned something today.
You can't go down to Goodwill and buy a car seat. And so, how are you going to get a brand new car?
Sanitation reasons, or
It has to do with safety stuff. How do you know if that car seat was ever compromised somehow? How do you know? You can't inspect that car seat to see if it's damaged in some way. So say somebody needs, say they have two children that are small, both children have grown out of their car seats and they need two car seats, and the car seats cost $160 a piece, and that person has to come up with $320 when they're already on a thin margin. And so our assumption is that maybe they could get it through the Oregon Department of Human Services through the Family Coach Program. Turns out, we found out today that that's not, that's a very complicated thing to do, and most likely they can't do it that way. So so that's where we come into play, is that we can get grant money from that for that purpose, and then we can also work with some of our other community partners to have that parent trained on how to properly install that particular car seat, because it's not just obvious how you put a car seat in the back of a car, and the rules change depending on how much the child weighs. There's a lot of rules around car seats.
okay.
So just a small thing, but we can be actively involved in making sure kids stay safe in the back seats, well, in cars, because not all parents know that the child is better off if they're in the back seat either. So we can help, we can play a role in that. So that's just a small thing. It goes all the way from taking somebody who is a senior citizen that has been evicted from their home to getting them into assisted living. I mean, that's something that we've been able to do on several occasions. Getting somebody who is living in the bushes into a travel trailer in a park, that's something that we've been able to do many times. Getting somebody who has not had a car or any access to transportation. We've taught 2 different people how to drive. So it's extensive. I mean, what we do is varied and very involved, and it's really important that we engage with folks on this personal basis where we essentially establish like family type relationships with these people.
So the neighborhood itself seems to need an abatement procedure. When you look at all the cars and vehicles and boats and all those on, but I wonder how they ever came up with the idea of using that procedure to try to stop a church.
Well, the main thing so there was the abatement stuff, but the underlying principle was we're not zoned to be a restaurant. We're zoned to be we have a conditional use permit to be a church, but we're not zoned or permitted to be a restaurant. And so that was kind of the core argument there. And we said, well, churches are, a soup kitchen is a ministry of a church and comes under the definition of the conditional use permit to be a church. And that was really
constitutionally protected.
And that was kind of the underlying thing, was what is a restaurant, and is a soup kitchen a restaurant? So that was the underlying principle that we were able to have a federal judge weigh in on. And, that stuff seems obvious to me, but we had to work through the process, I guess. And you're right. It did. When you talk about that about $1 million, it was $625,000 is how much money was spent directly on legal fees. When you take in our legal fees, and we had more legal fees than that, but they were absorbed by our legal team. The city paid at least $225,000 for theirs. But there was more money than that was spent.
Oh, sure.
Money that's harder to account for.
Yeah, the court has its clerks, it has its secretaries, it has its security. There was a attorney flown out from Washington to represent the U.S. Department of Justice.
That is true.
There's
also the time that the city staff spent on something that was not productive. So there's all the opportunity costs there that they could have been spending that time on other things. And then there's also the other legal fees that came because they have, the city has different legal representation. And so they had all those legal fees from their, I'm talking about the one specific law firm and the one specific lawyer that was representing them in court and through the proceedings. But they had a municipal lawyer, and that person was consulted on some things as well.
The matter of feedings was something that one might reasonably say is just a question of, they're trying to limit things and they're trying to sort it all out, and they have these people complaining. But when St. Tim's did not go along with that, they came up with a much more outrageous bit of legislation. They basically said that St. Tim's has to kick out anything going on its property that is not strictly a matter of a church as defined in a very limited way by them. I call it lexicographic malpractice. Somebody in the planning commission was told to justify what they're doing, so they Googled the word church, and they got 2 definitions from 2 very prestigious dictionaries. The Oxford English Dictionary, 20 volumes of trivia on words, and the similarly American-based, not quite as big, Webster Dictionary here, and which said the church is a building for Christian worship. Now, the Oxford English Dictionary has 17 other definitions of church. The Merriam-Webster also has many definitions, but when I say the city practiced lexicographical malpractice, I used to teach high school. And whenever I taught high school, and we started talking about how to use a dictionary and a thesaurus, I would say with a dictionary, rule number 1 is look at all the definitions. The city didn't do this, and yet they said that it was a basis to deny constitutional rights of people because somebody Googled the word church, and it didn't allow in their limited logical constructs the use of a church for anything other than Christian worship. Well, any good Christian knows that the worship that takes place in a church is related to one's life the rest of the time, day in and day out. And that often involves things like feeding people, showing compassion to people, treating people with dignity and respect. It means being willing to listen, and it means being responsive to whatever needs people have and show and need help on. St. Tim's is remarkable at this. They have figured out ways that people can get showers, that they can get their cell phones charged, that they can get vouchers to use a laundromat during certain hours each week, that they could be given legal help in getting things expunged on their record or whatever other legal help they needed, that they could find out ways to get health care. And all of these are going on at St. Tim's. And because of all that, and because some fool in their office thought that calling it a place only for Christian worship meant that all of those functions should and could be stopped at St. Tim's, and indeed they should be fined $720 a day while doing so. This was ultimately another track of litigation by the city and was going to be on appeal before a state land use board, but ultimately was dropped in the negotiation to end the federal lawsuit on the feeding programs. And for that, churches throughout the land should recognize that even though this was unprecedented in a technical legal sense, that enough progress, enough publicity took place publicizing these things, that people throughout the land learned that, hey, cities should not mess around with churches unless they have a compelling state interest that cannot be reached by other means.
Regardless of what their intentions were, they went about it wrong. I mean, I think we can all agree on that. I think the judge would agree as well that they went about it wrong because, you know, we won on summary judgment. It didn't go to a trial or anything like that. And what I don't understand is why so many people fell in line with that misguided idea, because it wasn't just one set of city council folk. There was a replacement city council that came into play.
Under dubious circumstances.
And they just agreed the same way. The planning commission also felt the same way, that they could, you know, violate our First Amendment rights. And what I'm trying to focus in on this point, though, is rebuilding those relationships, because in order for this community to move forward on affordable housing, we want to have a seat at the table. We want to be able to be part of that conversation with the city council, city officials, city staff, with various other interested parties within the community. We want to have a voice in that conversation, and so we want to rebuild our relationship with, you know, the city officials. And so we're in the process of doing that now. And having some success at it too, which is great news.
Well, I've been talking pretty freely about lots of things that have happened there, but at the same time, I'm glad that I was able to learn ways to publicize it in a town that is kind of a media void. The local paper is called the Curry Coastal Pilot, and it's more likely it should be called the Pilotless. When the federal judge ruled on these lawsuits, it took them 3 weeks to have a story about it in their place that keeps going by selling ads to merchants and publishing official notices. But so I decided to learn how to post things on YouTube, and especially on a website, progressivechristianity.org, where people throughout the world are interested in the type of things that have gone on in Brookings. We've heard from people in Minnesota, other parts of the United States of having similar situations going on there. And we've even heard from people in South Africa and England who just were amazed that all of this foolishness could happen. There might not be a legal precedent that has been set, but there's been a word of mouth precedent that has been set that can be shared on the internet, that can be shared on YouTube, that can be shared on sites like Progressive Christianity. And in the process of learning how to do this, I've also become a member of St. Tim's, and I'm look back in regret that I didn't become one earlier. I had a little trouble with the length of the sermons and the length of the liturgy and some of that kind of stuff. But when I saw how willing this congregation was to bravely fight off with their valiant vicar, with their dynamic deacon, and with their own members in ways that has let the whole world know that Christianity is not just about one's personal relationship with Jesus Christ. It's about one's relationship with respect and dignity to all the world, but especially those who are struggling.